Hey, I'm Gabe Yannis, and if I hated you, you would know. Alright, so anyway, you might hear a couple bangs here while I'm doing this intro, but I do want to kind of talk about this video a little bit before we dive right into it. So, in the past, for Dark and Weird, I did a lot more long-form scripted on one subject thing, which I really do enjoy doing, but it's not really how my brain works all the time. So, it's going to be more occasional here, but I do want to do those kind of things for topics that I think are bigger, right? And this is one of those topics, right? So, I have had this kind of thought in the back of my head for like a really long time. And if you're a friend of mine, you have had the unfortunate moment where I literally talked to you about this for a half an hour. There's no way you haven't if we are personal friends. So, but I had like this kind of psychic nudge, right? When I was watching the Bulwark and this happened.
I think you'd have a hard time like plausibly arguing that it comes down to really anything ultimately other than juice, right? I mean, like Zoran has it and Hakeem and Chuck do not. And therefore, you know, the second they step into the Oval Office, they are like just sucked into Trump's aura, right? And then they become just sort of an accessory to him.
So I saw the clip and I thought to myself, juice, that's not the right word. The word they meant was heat. This idea that American politics and professional wrestling are the same thing is an idea that's been rolling around in the back of my mind for a very long time. And there's a couple reasons why I think this is true. The first is that in many ways, professional wrestling grew up with the country. The first real rise in popularity that wrestling had was in the late 1800s with wrestlers like William Muldoon. Barely a generation away from the Civil War, the United States was still trying to find its way as a country. And wrestling was also fairly directionless, disorganized, and inefficient. But both were full of a type of creative energy that would always push the nation, or business, forward. As time went on, both country and wrestling found ways to consolidate and expand at the same time. Both mediums playing with the cultural zeitgeist to get more eyes on the product, put more butts in the seats, or votes in the ballot boxes. The second is that today we see close connections between the levers of power in government and the promoters of professional wrestling. And it is just too nuanced and layered of a connection to think that it's all just happenstance. But before I really dive in, it's important to start with a few terms. If you're a longtime wrestling fan, sorry, this part isn't for you, and there will be chapter breaks if you want to move past some of this really basic stuff. But past that, let's just get into it. The first term is kayfabe. This old carny word is a bastardized pig Latin term that at its most basic means be fake. The idea is a little more complicated than that though, and that complication is what creates a lot of the nuance around wrestling. Most people are suspicious, if not downright convinced, that some of what is being done within the confines of professional wrestling is being kept secret, and that no matter how much of the business is exposed, there is still something in the background that they are holding back from you. Those suspicions are well-founded because that is kayfabe. No matter how real it seems, it's almost always about the show. The show is based on the next term. A set of antonyms, these terms are work and shoot. A work is a match or any other part of the overall show that is done to further the storyline. It is part of the performance. A shoot is not. A shoot is when things get real. In the grand scheme of things, the work is almost always preferred to the shoot. It's more safe, it's more controlled, and you can always tell a better story. The second pair of terms is one that I think that most people that have any interaction with popular culture know about, and that is the heel and the face dynamic, more fully the baby face. At its most simple, the heel is a bad guy and the face is a good guy. And while the dynamic is typically binary, there's a lot of room for something in between. That usually gets called a tweener by wrestling commentators and YouTubers and the like. A guy like Stone Cold Steve Austin is a perfect example of a tweener. Kind of a badass, but still a good guy most of the time. One of the most important aspects of wrestling is the underlying structure that works in the background to support the wrestlers as performers. All of those positions have titles. Agents go between the performer and the people that are structuring the plot. The people structuring that plot are the bookers. On many levels, the wrestlers themselves are promoting the show, but they are not the end-all voice of the promotion or the show that they are on. That is reserved for the head honcho, the promoter. Finally, the last 4 terms that I want to touch on. A gimmick. It's anything that's used to get the story across. That might be a performer's character using a razor to quote-unquote gig yourself or cut yourself to get blood, or just even the merchandise that a performer is selling after the show. That's all a gimmick. I've heard wrestlers say, hey, go get my gimmick from the van, talking about a tote full of t-shirts. Heat. Big term. This is the energy that the performers receive from the crowd. Heat can be good or bad. It can be dead or nuclear. It can be any combination in between, but overall, it's just the reaction, right? Similar to heat is the idea of getting over. The root of this is just the idea that the winner of a match went over the loser of a match. But the idea of getting over has become significantly more nuanced with time. To get over is to get the crowd invested in the story you're telling. You can get over in any way. If you're a heel, you want to be hated. If you're a face, you want the love. But when the crowd embraces that story and the wrestler involved, then they're getting over. Finally, the last thing I want to touch on are the dirt sheets. Because of the nature of professional wrestling, getting reliable news on the subject is super difficult. So there's an ecosystem that's largely based in rumor and innuendo, trying to get at the heart of what's happening in a business that's ephemeral at best at times. There's a network of sources and inside baseball guys that are trading in information with YouTubers and reporters and writers to try to subtly tell stories in and out of reality. You're probably already starting to make some of the connections I'm going to make. So let's just missile dropkick right into it. The first comparison that I want to make takes us back to the time of Ronald Reagan and the rock and wrestling era of Hulk Hogan and Macho Man Randy Savage. Ooh, yeah. Bad Savage impression necessary. This is the time that most people are familiar with when talking about professional wrestling. And that time coincides with Reagan's 44 state sweep in the 1980 election and then a 49 state sweep in 1984. A moment of deep cultural connection and consolidation was happening in both the political and the wrestling spheres. After World War II, the United States saw a boom in its economy, and local politicians started to give birth to activist movements that were making some big changes. They weren't unique to the area, but there was a boom in them. By the time the 60s and 70s were happening of the people in those regions, that chaos drove politicians to approach their job in a very different way. The result was a power grab and a consolidation, all behind one leader who is the face of our nation. In wrestling, a system of local territories had managed itself just since after the war as well. The National Wrestling Alliance, or NWA, was creating local champions who would then travel through the whole country until the mid-1980s. While connected to each other, the regionality of the territory system allowed for different styles of wrestlers and different characters to thrive in different parts of the country, and then export that act to a separate part of the country where they hadn't been seen before. That is until a power grab and consolidation of those territories under the umbrella of one promotion, the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, WWWF, which would later become the World Wrestling Federation, or WWF. Originally started by Vince McMahon's father, Vince Sr., quickly, Vince McMahon became the face of this promotion. And I don't mean that as the good guy. I just mean front and center. He was the face of professional wrestling in the United States. This consolidation in both cases had a lot to do with the media landscape at the time. The combination of limited television channels and the ability of wealth to push specific messages on the airwaves made this a point in time when every eye could be pointed in the same direction. It was a time that was capable of giving clear and directed messages to the population, whether that be messaging for a movie star running for president or how Hulk Hogan was just as cool as Cyndi Lauper on MTV. Everyone was seeing, hearing, and largely accepting the same things. There were voices in politics and wrestling that were rejecting this level of homogenization, but they were drowned out by a well-funded media apparatus from both groups. As states were losing power to big federalizing movements, so too were territories losing to the conglomerate WWF. The consolidation did create large systems to manage, and you can't run a promotion that large without a structure. And the government, also a large institution, mirrors that structure in many ways. The wrestler is outwardly very important. They are the product that people want to see, but they aren't anywhere near in charge, and they can't really just go right to the top with an idea. They need a go-between. In wrestling, the agent is that person. They have a lot of functions. They help plan the matches. They do a lot of the back end nuts and bolts work, but ultimately they are the buffer between a booker and a wrestler. They serve effectively the same function as a lobbyist. The lobbyist is in that same middle ground. They're transmitting messages from those who are directing the story to those who will be attempting to do the work. So who are these bookers? In the world of professional wrestling and politics, this space is a little vague as to who specifically does what and who gets a say, but they're the inner circle of the show. In wrestling, we call the members of that inner circle the bookers. In politics, they're the senior advisors, and most of the time, members of the cabinet. That inner circle always faces pressures from the inside and the outside. In wrestling, the bookers are trying to tell a story in conjunction with advertisers and anyone else who's making money off of an event or a show. Sometimes even cities or entire countries. Just look at how Saudi Arabia and the WWE are working together to sports wash that criminality. These outside forces help direct the story in a way that won't damage their business. For the politicians, their business interests, donors, and even other nations. In both cases, these are groups of people who sit in a room and decide what direction the show is going to go in. Both wrestling and politics face a similar challenge. Will the audience go along with the story? Are they willing to suspend disbelief to maintain kayfabe? Will they leave the show satisfied? Did we make the money we wanted? There needs to be hype, though. Someone has to get that audience on board. Someone has to be front and center telling people what just happened and what's going to happen next. And that is the promoter. The promoter is the one communicating to the public why you must urgently get a ticket for the show or drop your hard-earned money for the pay-per-view. And many times it's been because the promoter was at the top of the card. From Vern Gagne to Dusty Rhodes to Vince McMahon, the promoter would often make himself the champ. And I think since the Reagan era, the president has been less of a policymaker and more of a promoter. More frequently, the president is a bullhorn telling people how they should vote, when they should do it, how they should interact with their fellow citizens, even which parts of the plot they should be following and which ones they should drop. Just look at Trump asking, are we still talking about Epstein? If you don't follow the promoter's guidance, you run the risk of them losing, and you wouldn't want that, especially if you wanted your president to remain the reigning, defending, and undisputed leader of the free world. So who are the wrestlers? Who's actually performing? Who are the people showing up to watch? Just like professional wrestling, sometimes the most important part of the whole show gets lost in the drama of behind the scenes. In politics, the actual thing that gets people involved, the motivation behind the voting, is what the legislative branch does. Day to day, week after week, they show up and show out on our TV screens and in our YouTube feeds. They're selling you the story. If I can just beat my opponent, then your life will be better. Just like the wrestler in the ring, they want you behind them. if they're a face, and they want you to despise him if they're a heel. And like a politician, sometimes those roles change depending on the space you're in. The meat and potatoes of our government is the legislature, just like the meat and potatoes of wrestling are the wrestlers. They're the reason we keep coming back, hoping that this time things will go our way, that maybe, just maybe, the good guys will win. Unfortunately, they're also the mid-card. A few might rise to the top to challenge the champ every few years, but in the long run, they're just spinning their wheels somewhere in the middle, trying their best to get noticed and to get over. Finally, there has to be a referee keeping it all in check. Enter our judicial branch. In the background, but essential to the whole thing functioning. So most people are completely unfamiliar with what a referee does in professional wrestling. And if you are unfamiliar, the referee has a much more important role in the match than just counting to 3 or slowly counting to 10 if the wrestlers are on the outside of the ring. They're communicating with the wrestlers where they should be in the ring physically, where they're at in the match, like structurally, how much time they have left, when they're going to ad breaks. They're making sure that everything goes according to plan. And when something doesn't work, they're there to mitigate the problem or just call the whole match off if things have gone so poorly that somebody's gotten hurt. Sometimes they're even willing to take a bump, right? The intentional blow to make them ineffective at their job. Sometimes the refs are even intentionally heels. Famously, in a Mexican promotion, there's just a bad guy ref. The courts serve a similar function of maintaining a tenuous order amongst the chaos of changing rules, changing performers, and plans going awry. They're also often coded to represent the interests of one party over the other, just like a heel ref. And sometimes they're faced with scandal and recusal, taking that bump right to the floor. These mirrored structures lead us to the most important part of the whole damn thing. Let's start with the state of it all. At the height of the 80s, both wrestling and politics were enjoying the very beginnings of the attention economy. With a president who used to be a movie star and a promotion that had its fingers in every pop culture pie, politics and wrestling were flying high. They were part of the national zeitgeist. In both venues, you would hear spontaneous chants of USA, USA. So would tropes of commie Soviets on the march and racial stereotypes on the rampage. Fast forward to now. The attention economy is significantly fragmented. Neither politics nor wrestling has the same kind of cultural cachet that it once had. Not as many people are active fans of wrestling, and people tend to hold their politics much more closely to the vest than they used to. How can either build the tension that they need to get the participation required? Well, that's where the work-shoot balance is important. So much of both endeavors is about perception, about creating an engaging story that people will want to pick sides for. No one is interested in watching a report on an infrastructure bill, just like no one is interested in watching William Muldoon wrestle for 9 hours to a draw. The stories also have to get bolder, crazier, more divisive. The story can't be as simple anymore. We blew past all the Soviet commies. They don't even have a USSR anymore. The plot can't rely on the same old tropes of racial discrimination because our culture has begun rejecting that. Somehow, both the promoter and the president have to create the same level of tension and interest, but with less tools. Sometimes they try to go back to the old standards. McMahon revealing a golden egg plotline that went over about as well as Trump telling people the Haitians are eating cats and dogs. Both of these old tropes went over about like a wet fart. Instead, both promoter and president have to lean more subtly into dividing people, because the easiest way to create the tension needed is to create a binary. The best and easiest way to make that binary interesting is to blend fact and fiction, to color the work with a shoot. In wrestling, CM Punk and Seth Rollins are perpetual rivals. It is a long and winding story that Punk In wrestling, CM Punk and Seth Rollins are perpetual rivals. It's a long and winding story that starts with Punk giving Rollins a shot, Punk abandoning the promotion and wrestling as a whole, and Rollins holding a grudge because Punk left him behind. In situations when they prepare for a match against each other, they run each other down, aggrandize themselves, but always return to the underlying truth of their rivalry, that they just don't like each other very much. Not just as part of a story, but as an extension of how they have interacted with each other over the years as professionals. The product presented on television is a work, but the feelings and sometimes the words they are saying to each other are a shoot. Who is a heel and who is a face in any given confrontation between the two isn't nearly as important as the only thing that the audience can say for sure is a fact, and that's their binary of opposition. And the story that they're telling of their dislike for one another is real. Politics is achieving the same goal by creating work problems for people to latch onto. In 1979, the Southern Baptist Conference affirmed the right to an abortion. Today, the consolidation of religion and right-wing politics has made a situation where that couldn't happen, and where the nuanced opinions of individuals are smoothed out in deference to the binary. You would be hard-pressed to find a Baptist who is willing to affirm the right to an abortion. A dirty, nasty Democrat, on the other hand, you would be hard-pressed to find one who would contradict that opinion. By creating a political binary that doesn't allow for any kind of nuance, the promoter now has control over the conversation being had about the promotion, or the president has control of the conversation about the country. And the winners and losers aren't nearly as important as keeping the audience engaged. By giving little glimmers of potential real-world effects of political decisions, think like no tax on tips or the potential for socialized healthcare, the work feels enough like a shoot that the audience stays invested. In the same way that the wrestling promotion uses the blur of work and shoot, so too does the government rely on our deeply held feelings on a subject to direct you into one silo or the other. Politicians create the binary argument, then stand firm in their stance, devoid of nuance or reason. They work each person interacting with the subject by preying on their shoot feelings. Whether the work is based in a politician's deeply held personal beliefs or not really only matters inasmuch as it contributes to working the voter into staying a fan of that legislator. It isn't just about getting you involved with a story through the plot. Sometimes it's more about the personality. To keep people really invested, you need a big draw, something to really keep eyes on the product, and nothing draws quite like a heel champion. When the bad guy is at the top, the audience is always ready to watch them fall. No one wants to miss the moment when the heel gets his comeuppance. They can see the old storyline played out in every 80s comedy, where the big evil corporation tries to buy out the small business and destroy the town, but the good guys win. There are a lot more legs in the face chasing the title that the heel champion has than in having the good guy on top. There's no more obvious heel champion than our current president. Not since the days of Nikolai Volkov or the Iron Sheik has a single man been so capable of getting a reaction in a room, positive or negative. And like wrestling, the response doesn't need to be one or the other. It just needs to be big. This president is the perfect heel champ, antagonizing, annoying, smug, and more than willing to tell you that the thing that you love is garbage bullshit. He is endlessly capable of getting that cheap heel heat. In the same way a heel champion would roll into Chicago and talk about how terrible the Bulls are, the president will roll up to a rally and tell the crowd how shitty everything he doesn't love is. All for the reaction. Cheers from his people. Boos from the fans of the other people. The factions are set. Two parties either sucking up to their champ or chasing the title. The best part of politics is that whichever faction you find yourself in, you always get to think that you're the face chasing after a heel champ. The drama creates itself. So now I've laid out the structure. Wrestlers and legislators, refs and judges, agents and lobbyists, bookers and advisors, the promoter in chief, the current, defending, reigning champion of the United States of America. We have the story. We have the drama. Now all we need is something to get people really engaged. None of that boring ass mat wrestling or budgetary crises. No rest holes or infrastructure. We need... Rewind to the Bulwark and how Mamdani has the juice. This is what wrestling would call heat, and heat is the most important thing that you can have. The kind of heat doesn't really matter. You can be hated or loved as long as the energy is up. Right now, there are some politicians that have the opposite of heat. Some refer to it as negative heat, but I tend to think of it as go-away heat. Sometimes go-away heat will feel like the normal kind of heat. Boos and jeers, that kind of thing. But eventually, even that goes away, and you're left with the silence of people that just want you to go away. A lot of the legislative branch has that go away heat. They are doing nothing. They are saying nothing, and no one wants them around. Senate Democrats like Chuck Schumer and House Republicans like Mike Johnson, whose name I had to look up even though he's the Speaker of the House, but his blandness made my brain blank out. Like even his name is boring. But on the opposite side, politicians that have a new idea, a new take, a new gimmick, they can build that heat, get the attention that they need, and maybe even get something done. So, how do you build the heat? Well, you cut a promo, of course. Apart from the actual wrestling, which sometimes can be repetitive and predictable, the most important part of wrestling is the promos. The moments where one wrestler looks down the barrel of the camera and calls out their opponent. In the world of politics, you have press conferences and talking head appearances on 24/7 news channels. Success is measured less in accomplishment and more in attention. The bigger voice, the badder the soundbite, the better the heat. Everyone remembers a bleach, blonde, bad-built butch body. No one gives a shit about the Infrastructure and Investment Jobs Act. Everyone remembers Steiner math, but not, yep, probably had the hardest match of my life. Well, at least until it found life on the internet as a meme. When a promo doesn't work, then it's time to get some actual juice. Getting juice is the term used in professional wrestling for when you have visible blood flowing. Wrestling is in a very interesting position, presenting a violent sport in a safe way. But sometimes you need to show the audience how high the stakes of a match are. One of the easiest ways to show off those stakes is by adding the most obvious code for real violence to a match. Blood. Like everything in wrestling, the shoot is preferred. But you can get juice the hard way. Real violence used to open up a cut. Like getting just punched in the head. Or you can do it the easier way. Gig yourself open and get that blood flowing. Controlled shock and awe. World War II, we got juice the hard way. A surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, death and destruction that pulled everyone in and got people really involved in what was going on. Sometimes the U.S. just has to gig itself in the hopes that they will get people on board again. War is a great motivator, and if the government can be in control of when and where it happens by manufacturing a crisis in Iran today or Canada tomorrow, then let's get that blood gushing. Like wrestling, though, we can tell most of the time. Getting juice the hard way shows. The viewers feel it and relate to it. A hardcore wrestler named Jun Kasai talks in an interview about how the weapons that he interacts with in the ring are always based on household items, so people can relate to the pain that he is going through. Getting juice the hard way is something that we know. When it's manufactured, though, it makes for some pretty disappointing results most of the time, and doesn't really get people on board, because honestly, we can tell when you're faking it. How can you tell if they're faking it, though? With both politics and wrestling creating a gray space where typically we would find actionable information, how can we figure out if the juice is legit, if the rivalry is a shoot, if the heat has any substance, or if we're all just being worked? Enter the dirt sheets. Since the start of wrestling, its nature has led to people guarding its secrets, and for just as long, people have been trying to discover them. In a 1922 issue of Ring magazine, there's an article where they discuss the dubious nature of wrestling matches and call for it to be regulated so that people can tell whether or not it's a work or a shoot. The government is no different. Classified information is kept away from citizens, secrets kept for our protection, because if you did know what was going on in the background, it would damage the product. The fear isn't that it'll blow your mind or hurt your feelings. It is that it will unsuspend your disbelief and let you see right through the kayfabe. And just like wrestling, people are always trying to get to the bottom of what the government is actually up to. The media ecosystems are the same. If you lean right or left, there's a pundit for you, whether it be Midas Touch or Turning Point or something in between. In the same way, the dirt sheets have their tribes, guys like Jim Cornette who can't stand the state of wrestling today and long for the old days, or channels like Wrestle Talk who speak more as entertainment critics than sports analysts, like they would have been in the past. You get to pick your poison, but at the heart of both poisons that are trying to get to real information, the promotion is trying to prevent that. Not only do they not want you to have that information, they want to control everything about it. And they certainly don't want any competition. If there's another time besides the rock and wrestling era of Hogan, when professional wrestling was really part of the culture, it was during the Monday Night Wars. Let me set the scene for those of you who don't know. Vince McMahon was the owner of World Wrestling Entertainment, or the WWE, a corporation that had been the largest contributor to the collapse of the territories era of wrestling. Ted Turner owned a large cable network and World Championship Wrestling, WCW, which was created from the assets of one of the collapsed territories. These two personal and business rivals were the kind of corporate capitalists that can't accept failure, so they both used wrestling to go head-to-head with one another. Their shows, Monday Night Raw on the WWE and Monday Nitro on WCW, went to war for attention supremacy. In the end, the war was won by the WWE for many reasons, but the final nail in WCW's coffin was the purchase of the promotion by Vince McMahon. WCW went silent because it just became another part of the WWE. Why fight your opponent when you can just purchase them and silence them through omission? A pattern that has continued in wrestling through the years since, with the WWE either purchasing entire promotions or putting wrestlers into WWE contracts until a promotion that's local doesn't have anyone left to hire. They also have a cartel of promotions that are affiliated with them. AAA in Mexico, Pro Wrestling Noah in Japan. TNA is a smaller stateside organization that kind of trains almost like farm teams. WWE's main rival, All Elite Wrestling, or AEW, has developed a similar cartel to promote itself globally, aligning itself with CMLL in Mexico. In Japan, they work closely with New Japan Pro Wrestling, and then stateside, they work with Ring of Honor in much the same way that the WWE uses TNA. Our politics is experiencing the same kind of consolidation. Republicans and Democrats are rivals on paper, but with cartels of news organizations, influencers, and corporations behind them, they're ultimately doing their best to buy the loudest voice, build the biggest ecosystem, and consolidate the most influence, power, and most importantly, attention. But in the long run, they're both presenting the same product. Get yours while you can. I got mine. The power players cross-pollinate as well. Trump has made appearances, even been in matches at WWE shows. McMahon's wife is the Secretary of Education. Paul Levesque, also known as Hunter Hearst Helmsley, also known as The Game, also known as the Cerebral Assassin, also known as Triple H, is part of the President's Council on Sports, Fitness, and Nutrition. Just a few quick examples of how both the promoters and the president run in the same circles. Surprised we haven't seen McMahon in the Trump-Epstein files. So where does that leave us? One of the greatest minds in professional wrestling was Virgil Riley Runnels Jr. He was called the Bounty Hunter, the Midnight Rider, Mr. Ichiban, and Uvalde Slim, but the world would know him as the son of a plumber, the American Dream, Dusty Rhodes. There's an often noted idea that the best characters in wrestling are just yourself turned up to 11 or like 110%. I don't think I would be too far out of line to say that Dusty Rhodes is one of the best characters of all time, and that Rhodes seemed like he was very similar in real life to his on-screen persona. That on-screen persona could be brash, boastful, and proud of his accomplishments, but there was always humility behind it. The same kind of humility that I know we have all experienced from someone close to us. We all know the guy who has spent years busting his ass just to scrape by and make a living, who will brag about what he does, always second guesses himself because he hasn't been able to accomplish the financial success that he sees on TV or in a magazine. The crazy thing is that I'm probably describing you. Someone who works hard, does their best for their family, but always feels like they're falling short. The reason Dusty was so good at wrestling was his connection to the audience. We can all see a little of ourselves in Dusty Rhodes. We have all had some hard times. But that persona had a message that I don't know everyone always sees, especially if you're not a big fan of wrestling. Dusty wanted to show us all that you could work hard, be the best, be a champion, rule the roost, but the system was rigged against you. In 1985, at a wrestling event called Starrcade, Dusty Rhodes was squaring off against his lifelong rival Ric Flair for the NWA Championship. As the match proceeded, the first ref took a bump, and as he was struggling, one of Ric Flair's compatriots interfered in the match, attacking Rhodes. Despite the odds being stacked against him, Rhodes managed to get the pin and win the belt. Until the first referee decided that since there'd been interference in a championship match, the match had to be thrown out and Flair and Rhodes would have to have a rematch at a later date. This is the Dusty finish, a gimmick that Rhodes used over and over throughout his career, because it is a gimmick that everyone understands. Every moment that we feel like we're ahead, the systems that are around us find a way to make sure that we get pushed back down and stay in place. That feeling doesn't apply to a singular part of the population. It applies to nearly all of us. We have all felt the invisible hand of a corporation, a religion, a tradition, or a stereotype that's meant to keep you in your station and to prevent you from ever becoming the champion. Dusty won, and then he was unfairly denied his reward, and that was a work. That's the story the promoter wanted you to believe. Dusty faced a lot of opposition when WWE bought WCW because Dusty had been a big part of the WCW, not only as a wrestler, but also as a booker and a promoter. So during his time in the WWE, he was never allowed to be the world champion. He never got his chance to carry the belt for his new company, and that was a shoot. So, what story is keeping you down today? What kayfabe is the promoter selling you? Are you getting worked? Or is this all a shoot? I'm here to say you're getting worked. You know why? Because